Taehyung's agreement hung between them, fragile yet unshakable. Jungkook didn't move immediately, as if afraid that one wrong step would shatter the moment. But then, ever so carefully, his fingers curled around Taehyung's wrist, his warmth seeping into Taehyung's skin. "You mean it?" Jungkook's voice was steady, but his eyes were desperate. Taehyung swallowed. He hesitated, then nodded. "I mean it," Jungkook exhaled, his grip tightening just slightly before he let go. "Then don't run again, Taehyung. If you need space, if you need time, tell me. But don't disappear." Taehyung looked down at the floor, shame curling in his stomach. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he murmured. Jungkook shook his head. "I know. But it still did." The words were quiet, but they hit like a punch to the gut. Taehyung clenched his jaw. "I was just scared. I was too." That made Taehyung look up. Jungkook gave a small, bitter chuckle. "Do you think it was easy for me to act normal at work while wondering if you were gone for good?" His voice dropped lower. "To go home to an empty house and wonder if you'd ever come back?" Guilt twisted inside Taehyung's chest. "I didn't think." "I know," Jungkook interrupted gently. "But I need you to." Taehyung felt something crack open inside him. Because Jungkook was right. They had spent so much time hurting, so much time breaking apart, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to start learning how to stay. He let out a slow breath, then, hesitant, but firm, he reached for Jungkook's hand. Jungkook's eyes widened slightly at the gesture, but he didn't pull away. Taehyung's fingers curled around his, tight, like an anchor. "I'll try," he whispered. "I don't know if I'll be good at it, but I'll try." Jungkook's throat bobbed, his grip tightening. "That's enough." And for the first time in a long time, maybe, just maybe, it was. Taehyung didn't realize how much tension had been holding him together until Jungkook's fingers tightened around his. It was grounding, warm, steady, real. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, fingers entwined, breathing in sync. Then Jungkook gently pulled Taehyung forward, leading him to the couch. "Sit," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung hesitated before sinking onto the cushions. His heart was pounding, his mind racing. He had spent so much time avoiding them, that now, faced with the reality of it, he didn't know how to begin. Jungkook sat beside him, close but not touching. He didn't push, didn't rush. He just waited. Taehyung took a shaky breath. "I don't know what to say," Jungkook hummed softly. "Then don't say anything," and somehow, that made it easier. They sat in silence, but this time, it wasn't heavy or suffocating. It wasn't the silence of avoidance or pain. It was just them. After a moment, Jungkook turned to him. "You're tired, aren't you?" Taehyung blinked at the sudden shift. "What?" Jungkook gave him a knowing look. "You look exhausted, Tae." His voice was softer now. "Have you been sleeping?" Taehyung looked away. "Not really," Jungkook exhaled. He hesitated, then reached out, his fingers brushing against Taehyung's wrist again. "You can rest now." Taehyung's breath hitched. Because wasn't that the one thing he had been running from? The moment he let himself rest, the moment he let himself stay, it would all become real. But maybe, it already was. Slowly, cautiously, he let Jungkook tug him forward. Let himself lean into the warmth of Jungkook's side, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. And when Jungkook's arm wrapped around him, secure, protective, unwavering, Taehyung finally let himself close his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe. Taehyung didn't know how long he stayed like that, pressed against Jungkook's side, lulled by his warmth. Sleep never fully came, but for the first time in weeks, his mind wasn't racing. Jungkook didn't move, didn't speak. He just held him, fingers occasionally brushing against Taehyung's arm in quiet reassurance. But peace was fragile. And Taehyung knew it wouldn't last forever. "Do you regret it?" Jungkook's voice was barely above a whisper. Taehyung tensed. What? Jungkook hesitated, then exhaled. Coming back, Taehyung's throat tightened. He wanted to say no, wanted to say he was sure. That he didn't regret being here, that he wasn't afraid anymore. But it wasn't that simple. "I don't know," he admitted instead. His voice was quiet, almost ashamed. Jungkook didn't react immediately. He just nodded, as if he had already expected that answer. "That's okay," Taehyung swallowed. "Is it?" Jungkook finally pulled back just enough to look at him. His dark eyes searched Taehyung's face, filled with something too complicated to name. "I'd rather have you here, uncertain, than not have you at all," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung's breath hitched. Because God, how was Jungkook always like this? How did he always manage to say the one thing that made Taehyung's walls crumble, that made him feel seen? He wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. But the past was still there. And no matter how much Jungkook wanted to hold on, Taehyung wasn't sure if he was strong enough to do the same. The morning light streamed through the curtains, casting soft shadows over the room. Taehyung blinked against the brightness, his body still heavy with exhaustion. And then he felt it, warmth, steady and unrelenting, wrapped around his wrist. Jungkook. Even in sleep, Jungkook's fingers remained loosely curled around Taehyung's wrist, as if afraid that if he let go, Taehyung would slip away again. Taehyung swallowed against the lump in his throat. This was what he had been afraid of, the weight of Jungkook's love, the quiet way he held on even when Taehyung wasn't sure if he deserved it. But maybe it wasn't about deserving it. Maybe it was just about choosing it. Taehyung hesitated only for a second before turning his hand over, threading his fingers through Jungkook's. Jungkook stirred slightly, eyelashes fluttering before he finally opened his eyes. His gaze found Taehyung instantly, hazy with sleep but filled with something softer. Something real. "You're still here," Jungkook murmured. His voice was rough with sleep, but there was relief in it. Taehyung's lips parted. He could still leave. He could still run. But instead, he tightened his grip on Jungkook's hand. "I'm here," he whispered back. Jungkook's breath hitched, his fingers squeezing Taehyung's in return. And in that moment, the past didn't matter. The fears, the regrets, the doubts, they all faded into the background. Because Taehyung was choosing this. Choosing Jungkook. Choosing them. And this time, he wasn't going to let go. The world outside was quiet, the soft hum of the city a distant backdrop to the warmth inside their home. Taehyung stood by the window, a cup of coffee cradled between his hands. He had always loved the mornings, how everything felt fresh, like a new beginning. Arms wrapped around his waist from behind, a warm chest pressing against his back. "You're awake early," Jungkook mumbled, his voice still heavy with sleep. His lips brushed against the shell of Taehyung's ear, sending a familiar shiver down his spine. Taehyung smiled. "I like the mornings," Jungkook hummed, nuzzling into the crook of Taehyung's neck. "I like waking up next to you." A warmth bloomed in Taehyung's chest, one that had nothing to do with the coffee in his hands. It had been months since he had come back, since he had stopped running. And not once had he regretted it. There were still difficult days, moments where old fears tried to creep in. But the difference now was that he chose to stay. They both did. Jungkook pulled back slightly, turning Taehyung to face him. His dark eyes were soft, filled with something Taehyung still wasn't used to seeing so openly: love, unwavering and sure. "I meant it, you know," Jungkook said. "When I said I wouldn't let you go again." Taehyung's breath caught in his throat. Jungkook reached into his pocket, pulling out something small, something that made Taehyung's heart stop. A ring. Simple, silver, but undeniably theirs. Jungkook held it out, his fingers trembling just slightly. "I don't need an answer now. I want you to know that when you're ready, whenever that is, I'll be waiting." Taehyung stared at him, at the boy who had once broken his heart and the man who had stitched it back together, piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, there was no hesitation. He took the ring, his fingers brushing against Jungkook's as he slid it onto his own finger. Jungkook inhaled sharply, eyes widening. "Taehyung, I'm ready now," Taehyung whispered. Jungkook's lips parted, his breath shuddering out. "Are you sure?" Taehyung smiled, cupping Jungkook's face between his hands. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Jungkook exhaled a laugh, shaky and full of disbelief, before pulling Taehyung into a kiss, one that tasted like promises kept and a love that had stayed. And this time, neither of them let go.